Three thugs made the worst mistake of their lives when they attacked a woman in a wheelchair at Aurelia Grove Galleria. They thought she was just another helpless victim, but they didn't know about her deadly past as an elite assassin. What happened next left everyone speechless. Want to know how this shocking confrontation ended? Subscribe to our channel right now and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Hit that notification bell to never miss our incredible true stories of justice served. The crystalline chandeliers of Aurelia Grove Galleria cast an ethereal glow across the polished marble floors, their light dancing off the frost-kissed windows of the upscale shopping center. Outside, the first snowflakes of winter pirouetted through the crisp evening air, adding to the magical atmosphere of the Luminary Festival. Among the well-dressed shoppers and festive decorations, Nyasia Kalvyn navigated her wheelchair with practiced precision, her movements fluid and controlled despite her apparent disability. At 42, Nyasia carried herself with a quiet dignity that masked a lethal past. Her hands, now gently guiding her wheelchair's wheels, had once been instruments of precision in a very different way. Few would guess that this elegant woman, with her silver-streaked dark hair and thoughtful amber eyes, had once been one of the most feared operatives in the underground world of contract killers. 10 years had passed since a mission gone wrong had left her with a severed spine and a chance at a new life. Now, she was simply another face in the crowd, a mother and wife who had traded in her weapons for a peaceful existence. Her son, Zephyr, walked beside her, his 9-year-old face bright with excitement as they made their way through the Obsidian Court, the most exclusive wing of the Galleria. "Mom, can we get hot chocolate from Syrene's?" Zephyr asked, his eyes drawn to the artisanal cafe where elaborate holiday drinks were being crafted with theatrical flair. Steam rose from copper vessels, and the rich scent of chocolate and spices wafted through the air. Nyasia smiled, remembering how different her life had been a decade ago. Back then, she had been known only as the Shadow, a ghost in the night who never left traces, only perfectly executed contracts. Now her greatest concern was whether to allow her son an extra marshmallow in his hot chocolate. "Of course, sweetheart," she replied, adjusting the blanket across her legs. The winter chill had a way of making her old injuries ache, a constant reminder of the price she'd paid for her redemption. "Your father will meet us there soon." Tarek, her husband, was running late from his consulting job at a private security firm, a legitimate career that utilized his extensive military intelligence background. Their meeting at the Galleria had been planned for weeks, a family outing to celebrate the Luminary Festival and mark another year of their peaceful new life. As they approached the entrance to the Obsidian Court's exclusive shops, Nyasia noticed the security guard stationed at the checkpoint. Malachi Voss stood with his feet planted wide, his face set in a perpetual scowl as he scrutinized each patron who passed through. Something about his stance, the way his eyes darted suspiciously, triggered old instincts in Nyasia, instincts she'd spent years suppressing. The guard's gaze locked onto her wheelchair, then shifted to Zephyr and finally settled on her face with an intensity that spoke of prejudice and assumed authority. Nyasia felt her muscles tense involuntarily, muscle memory from a life she'd left behind preparing her for potential conflict. "Excuse me," she said politely as they reached the checkpoint. "We're heading to Syrene's cafe." She maintained a calm demeanor, though her trained eye had already cataloged 7 different ways to incapacitate the guard should the need arise, an old habit she couldn't quite shake. Voss didn't move. Instead, he crossed his arms and leaned forward, his security badge glinting under the chandeliers. "This is a restricted area," he said, his voice dripping with unwarranted suspicion. "We've had some incidents recently, people trying to take advantage of special access they don't deserve." Nyasia felt Zephyr's hand tighten on her wheelchair's armrest. She placed her own hand over his, a gesture of reassurance that masked the calculating precision with which she was assessing the situation. The guard's body language, his aggressive stance, the way his right hand kept drifting toward his belt, all of it spoke to an escalating confrontation. "I have my proper documentation," Nyasia responded, reaching for her bag with deliberate slowness. Years of training had taught her to move in ways that wouldn't be perceived as threatening. Even as her mind mapped out every possible scenario this encounter could follow. "Would you like to see it?" Voss's sneer deepened. "Documentation can be faked," he said, taking a step closer. "We get all sorts trying to scam their way in here. You don't look disabled to me." The words hung in the air like frost, sharp and biting. Around them, other shoppers began to slow their pace, attention drawn to the unfolding scene. Nyasia felt the weight of their stares, but more importantly, she sensed something darker in Voss's demeanor, a hunger for confrontation that reminded her of predators she'd encountered in her previous life. The tension in the air thickened as 3 more security guards emerged from the shadows of the obsidian court's marble columns. They moved with a coordinated precision that instantly set off warning bells in Nyasia's mind. These weren't typical mall security. Their movements spoke of military or mercenary training. Her eyes flickered between them, noting their positions, their stances, the subtle bulges in their jackets that suggested concealed weapons. "Is there a problem here, Voss?" The tallest of the newcomers stepped forward, his name tag reading C. Reeves. His voice carried the artificial smoothness of someone used to making threats sound like polite conversation. Nyasia's trained eye caught the almost imperceptible nod exchanged between Voss and Reeves. This wasn't a random confrontation. It was coordinated. In her former life, she would have already identified this as a potential ambush. But now, with Zephyr clutching her wheelchair, she had to play this differently. "No problem," she replied, keeping her voice steady and maternal. "I was just explaining to Mr. Voss that we're meeting my husband at Cyrene's cafe." She felt Zephyr's grip tighten on her wheelchair, his intuition picking up on the underlying danger despite his young age. Reeves stepped closer, positioning himself to block their path more effectively. "You know, it's interesting," he said, his hand casually resting on his belt. "We've had reports of someone casing the high-end shops in this section. Someone in a wheelchair." His eyes bore into Nyasia's with predatory intensity. "Convenient disguise, wouldn't you say?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Around them, shoppers began to gather at a safe distance, their phones appearing in hands like fireflies in the dimming evening light. Nyasia could feel the weight of their stares, the whispered conversations, the growing spectacle of it all. "I assure you, this is not a disguise," Nyasia responded, her calm facade masking the rapid calculations running through her mind. She counted 4 guards now, all positioned strategically around her and Zephyr. In her previous life, she would have already noted 7 different escape routes and 15 ways to neutralize the threats. But those days were behind her, or so she had thought. Voss snorted derisively. "Yeah? Then stand up. Prove it's not an act." The command triggered something deep within Nyasia, a flash of memory from her last mission, when a similar demand had preceded the gunshot that had put her in this wheelchair. But that night had also given her a chance at redemption, at a normal life with Tarek and their son. "I can't stand," she said firmly, one hand protectively touching Zephyr's arm. "And I shouldn't have to prove my disability to you or anyone else. We have every right to be here." "Rights?" Reeves laughed, the sound echoing off the polished surfaces of the upscale corridor. "This is private property, ma'am. We decide who has rights here." He gestured to his colleagues, who began to close in tighter. "And right now, we've decided you look suspicious." Nyasia felt her muscles coil instinctively, years of training demanding a response to the threatening movement. But she forced herself to remain still, aware of the growing crowd of onlookers, of her son's presence, of everything she had built in the past decade. "Mom?" Zephyr's voice trembled slightly. "Why are they being so mean?" The question cut through Nyasia's tactical assessment like a knife. This wasn't just about her anymore. Every decision she made now would shape her son's understanding of justice, of right and wrong, of how to face adversity. "It's okay, sweetheart," she soothed, though her eyes never left the guards. "Sometimes people make assumptions without knowing the whole story." Reeves's radio crackled to life and he stepped back slightly to respond. Nyasia's enhanced hearing, honed by years of covert operations, caught fragments of the conversation. "Suspect matches description. Potential theft ring. Take them in. The words confirmed her suspicions. This wasn't random harassment. Someone had specifically targeted this location, and now she and Zephyr were caught in the middle of something bigger. But who would be bold enough to use a wheelchair as a disguise in such a high-security location? Unless... A cold realization washed over her. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 10 years ago, before the shooting that had changed her life, she had conducted surveillance on this very galleria for a potential contract. The target had been a corrupt business owner who used the high-end shops as a front for money laundering. She had never completed that contract, but someone else must have picked up where she left off. Now the past she had tried so hard to leave behind was threatening to collide with her present in the worst possible way. The guards weren't entirely wrong. There was someone casing the shops, they just had the wrong person in the wheelchair. Listen, she tried one last time. My husband will be here any minute. He can verify everything I'm telling you. Oh, we'll wait for him, Voss sneered, exchanging knowing looks with his colleagues. In fact, we've already called for additional security. No one's going anywhere until we get to the bottom of this. The implicit threat in his words was clear. They weren't just going to wait. They were going to escalate. Nyasia could see it in their postures, in the way they continually scanned the crowd, in how their hands stayed close to their weapons. These men were expecting trouble, maybe even hoping for it. As if on cue, the heavy footsteps of approaching reinforcements echoed through the marble corridors. The situation was about to become much more complicated, and Nyasia knew she had precious few moments to decide how to handle it. Everything she had worked for, her new life, her family's safety, her hard-won peace, hung in the balance. The heavy double doors at the end of the corridor burst open, and Officer Lorcan Thorne strode in with 2 deputies flanking him. His presence seemed to fill the space, dark uniform pristine, badge gleaming under the crystal chandeliers. He moved with the arrogant confidence of someone who had never been challenged, never been proven wrong. Nyasia's heart rate remained steady, her breathing controlled. Old habits from years of facing down far more dangerous men than Officer Thorne. But it was the way he looked at Zephyr that made her fingers tighten imperceptibly on her wheelchair's armrests. She recognized that look, the casual cruelty of someone who saw civilians as pawns rather than people. "Report!" Thorne barked at Reeves, his eyes never leaving Nyasia and Zephyr. "Suspicious activity, sir," Reeves responded, straightening his posture. "Subject matches the description from the luxury store robberies. Wheelchair user, professional demeanor, child as potential cover." Thorne's lips curled into what might have been a smile but held no warmth. "Is that right?" He approached Nyasia, his boots clicking against the marble floor. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with us for questioning." "On what grounds?" Nyasia asked, her voice carrying the perfect mix of confusion and indignation, a tone she had perfected during countless undercover operations. "I'm here with my son, waiting for my husband. We haven't done anything wrong." "That's for us to determine," Thorne replied. He reached for her wheelchair handles, and Nyasia felt her combat instincts surge. In her former life, such a move would have ended with broken fingers at minimum. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." Zephyr stepped between Thorne and his mother's wheelchair. "Don't touch my mom," he demanded, his young voice wavering but determined. The crowd that had gathered gasped at the child's bravery, and more phones rose to record the confrontation. Thorne's expression darkened. "Control your kid," he growled, "or we'll have to call Child Protective Services. We wouldn't want him to end up in the system because his mother made poor choices, would we?" The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Nyasia felt a familiar coldness settle over her, the same detachment she had once used before eliminating a target. But she forced it back. She wasn't that person anymore. She couldn't be, not with Zephyr watching. "Officer Thorne," she said, her voice steady despite the rage building inside her. "You're making a mistake. I have documentation for my disability and we're simply here to meet my husband." There's no need for threats or intimidation. Documentation? Thorne scoffed. He snatched her purse before she could react, roughly dumping its contents onto the floor. Lipstick, wallet, phone, and medical papers scattered across the polished marble. Let's see what else you're carrying. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, more hostile. Someone shouted, "You can't do that." Another voice called out, "I'm recording everything." But Thorne seemed beyond caring about public opinion or proper procedure. As he rifled through her belongings, Nyasia caught a glimpse of something in his jacket pocket, a familiar logo that made her blood run cold. It was the symbol of the Black Iris Corporation, the same organization she had been investigating a decade ago when she was shot. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. The targeted harassment, the excessive response, the desperate search for something. They weren't looking for a thief. They were looking for evidence of their own crimes. "Nothing here but everyday junk," Thorne announced, standing up. "Funny how criminals get better at hiding things these days." He turned to his deputies. "Search the wheelchair, thoroughly." One of the deputies stepped forward, reaching for the wheelchair's cushion. Nyasia knew what they would find if they looked carefully enough. Not evidence of theft, but the slim blade she still kept hidden in the frame, a last resort from her former life that she had never quite been able to give up. "Stop!" Zephyr shouted, trying to block the deputy's advance. "Leave her alone!" Thorne's hand shot out, grabbing Zephyr's arm roughly. "That's it, kid. You're interfering with a police investigation." The moment Thorne's hand touched her son, something snapped inside Nyasia. A decade of peaceful living, of carefully maintained control, cracked like ice in spring. Her fingers found the pressure points in Thorne's wrist before she even realized she was moving, applying just enough force to make him release Zephyr with a yelp of pain. "Don't you dare touch my son," she said, her voice carrying a deadly edge that made everyone within earshot take a step back. For just a moment, the mask of disabled mother slipped, and something of the shadow leaked through, something in her eyes that spoke of violence and expertise. Thorne staggered back, clutching his wrist, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. "That's assault on a police officer," he snarled, reaching for his handcuffs. "You're under arrest." The deputies moved in, and the security guards formed a tight circle around them. Nyasia could hear Zephyr's frightened breathing, see the phones recording everything, feel the weight of a dozen hostile gazes. She had spent 10 years building a new life, becoming someone her son could be proud of. Now, in one unguarded moment, she had put it all at risk. But as Thorne advanced with his handcuffs raised, Nyasia knew the real decision wasn't about protecting her new life. It was about protecting her son. And for that, she might have to become the Shadow one last time. The air in the obsidian court crackled with tension as Officer Thorne advanced, handcuffs glinting under the crystal chandeliers. Behind him, the deputies spread out in a practiced formation that Nyasia recognized from her past life, a containment pattern designed to handle dangerous suspects. The irony wasn't lost on her. "Last chance," Thorne announced, his voice carrying the false authority of a man drunk on power. "Submit to arrest peacefully, or we'll be forced to use more aggressive methods." His hand drifted meaningfully toward his taser. Nyasia's mind raced through scenarios with the cold efficiency of her former profession. She could disable all 3 officers in under 10 seconds. The knowledge burned in her muscle memory like a brand, but that would mean exposing her true capabilities, destroying the careful facade she'd built over the past decade. More importantly, it would mean showing Zephyr a side of his mother she'd hoped he'd never have to see. "Officer," she tried one last time, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "You're making a serious mistake. My husband—" "Your husband isn't here," Thorne cut her off with a sneer. "And even if he was, it wouldn't matter. We've got witnesses who saw you assault an officer." He gestured to the security guards, who nodded in practiced unison. "That's a felony." A sharp laugh cut through the tension. "Witnesses? You mean your paid thugs?" The voice belonged to Dr. Lysandra Thale, who stepped forward from the crowd, her phone held high. "I've got the real witness testimony right here. Video of you assaulting a child and his disabled mother." Nyasia recognized Dr. Thale from the rehabilitation center where she'd spent months learning to navigate life in a wheelchair. The doctor had always seemed too observant, too interested in Nyasia's unusually quick adaptation to her disability. Now, as their eyes met, Nyasia saw something in the doctor's gaze that suggested she'd always known there was more to her patient's story. "This doesn't concern you," Thorne growled, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes as he noticed how many phones were now recording the confrontation. "Actually, it concerns all of us," another voice called out. Soren Casimir, the owner of an artisanal tea shop in the Obsidian Court, stepped forward to stand beside Dr. Thale. "We're tired of watching your security team harass legitimate customers while ignoring the real criminals." Nyasia's enhanced situational awareness caught the subtle flinch from Thorne at the word criminals. Her suspicions about Black Iris Corporation's involvement deepened. She also noticed how the security guards were slowly shifting their positions, trying to block the crowd's view of what was about to happen. "Mom," Zephyr whispered, pressing close to her wheelchair. "I'm scared." The tremor in her son's voice crystallized everything for Nyasia. She couldn't fight her way out of this, not without destroying everything she'd built, but she could still think like the Shadow, could still outmaneuver her opponents without revealing her true nature. "It's okay, sweetheart," she said softly, then raised her voice to address Thorne. "Officer, since you're so concerned about security, perhaps we should review the Galleria's camera footage. I'm sure it will show exactly who assaulted whom." Thorne's face darkened. "The cameras in this section are currently undergoing maintenance." "How convenient, Doctor," Thale remarked dryly. "Just like they were last week when those luxury watches disappeared from Kronos Boutique." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Around them, the crowd began to murmur, connecting dots that Nyasia had already mapped out. The disabled woman in the wheelchair wasn't the real threat to the Galleria's security. She was just a convenient distraction from something much bigger. But before the situation could evolve further, a new complication emerged. Through the growing crowd, Nyasia spotted 3 men moving with the distinctive gait of professional operators. They weren't police or regular security. Their movements were too smooth, too practiced. They reminded her of the wet work teams she used to encounter in her previous life. One of them caught her eye and smiled, a predatory expression that confirmed her worst fears. Black Iris Corporation hadn't just corrupted the local security, they'd brought in cleaners to deal with any loose ends. And right now, she and everyone around her were potential loose ends. "Officer Thorne," the lead cleaner called out as he approached, pulling out what appeared to be federal credentials. "We'll take it from here. This is now a matter of national security." Nyasia's fingers found the hidden catch in her wheelchair's frame where her blade was concealed. She hadn't touched it in 10 years, had sworn she never would again. But as she watched the cleaners position themselves around her and Zephyr, she knew that peaceful options were rapidly disappearing. The crowd's phones were still recording, Doctor. Thale and Soren Casimir were still standing their ground, and somewhere in the Galleria, her husband Tarek was probably already on his way. But none of that would matter if the Black Iris cleaners decided to contain the situation their way. They weren't known for leaving witnesses. As if reading her thoughts, the lead cleaner's hand slipped inside his jacket, and Nyasia caught the distinctive outline of a suppressed handgun. Her own hand tightened on her wheelchair's armrest, inches from her concealed blade. The next few moments would determine everything: her safety, her son's future, and whether the Shadow would have to emerge from retirement to protect them all. Time seemed to slow as Nyasia watched the lead cleaner's hand grip his concealed weapon. A decade of peaceful living fell away like autumn leaves, and her mind snapped into its old tactical patterns. 3 cleaners, all armed, probably with backup waiting outside. Officer Thorne and his deputies, more liabilities than threats. The security guards already backing away. They hadn't signed up for whatever was about to happen. Most crucially, there were civilians everywhere. Dr. Thale and Soren Casimir still stood their ground, phones raised, while other shoppers pressed against the storefronts, simultaneously drawn to and frightened by the mounting tension. And Zephyr, her beautiful, brave son, trembled beside her wheelchair, his small hand gripping the armrest. "Everyone clear the area," the lead cleaner announced, pulling out a badge that Nyasia instantly recognized as a high-quality fake. "This is now a federal matter." "Federal?" Dr. Thale scoffed, her phone still recording. "Which agency?" "Because I've worked with federal law enforcement at the rehabilitation center, and I've never seen credentials quite like those." The lead cleaner's practiced smile flickered for just a moment. His two colleagues had positioned themselves strategically, one near the emergency exit, the other by the main corridor. Classic containment formation. They were preparing to clear the area, one way or another. "Ma'am," the cleaner addressed Nyasia, ignoring Dr. Thale's question, "you'll need to come with us. We have some questions about your connection to certain organizations." Nyasia felt her pulse steady, her breathing calm, the familiar state of focused readiness she had known in her former life. "What organizations would those be?" she asked, buying time while her trained eye assessed the cleaner's weaknesses. The leader favored his left side, probably an old injury. The one by the emergency exit was too tense, likely to overreact. The third had positioned himself poorly, creating a blind spot. "That's classified," the cleaner replied smoothly. "Now please ask your son to step away from the wheelchair." "Number..." The word came out soft but filled with steel. "My son stays with me." The leader's face hardened. That wasn't a request. He moved his hand inside his jacket again, and several people in the crowd gasped. Officer Thorne, who had been watching the exchange with growing unease, finally seemed to realize he was losing control of the situation. "Now wait just a minute," he started. "You can't just..." The lead cleaner cut him off with a look that made the corrupt officer step back. "Actually, we can. And unless you want certain information about Black Iris Corporation's arrangements with local law enforcement to become public, you'll help us clear this area. Now." The threat was clear, and Thorne's face went pale. He turned to the crowd, trying to regain his authority. "Everyone needs to leave. This is a restricted area." But the crowd had grown too large, too invested in the unfolding drama. Phones continued recording and voices of protest rose from all directions. Nyasia knew the cleaners wouldn't tolerate this much exposure for long. They would have to act soon, and when they did, it would be fast and brutal. "Zephyr," she whispered, keeping her eyes on the cleaners, "do you remember what Mommy taught you about the emergency signal?" Her son nodded almost imperceptibly. Years of careful preparation, disguised as games and secret codes, had readied him for this moment. If things went wrong, he knew exactly where to run and who to call. The lead cleaner took another step forward, his false smile now completely gone. "Last chance to do this quietly," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Otherwise, we start dealing with witnesses." Something in his tone made the crowd finally begin to retreat. Even Dr. Thale and Soren Casimir stepped back, though their phones remained raised. Only Nyasia and Zephyr stayed in place, the air around them thick with impending violence. "Mom?" Zephyr's voice quavered. "It's okay, sweetheart," she replied, her tone carrying a depth of meaning only he would understand. "Remember what to do if you see the signal." The lead cleaner's hand emerged from his jacket, and time seemed to crystallize into perfect clarity. Nyasia saw everything at once. The subtle nod between the cleaners, Officer Thorne backing away toward the exit, the security guards herding the last remaining spectators back, and most importantly, the barely noticeable red dot that had appeared on the wall behind the lead cleaner's head. A faint smile touched Nyasia's lips. Trust Tarek to already be in position. The cleaner caught her smile and hesitated, his instincts warning him something was wrong. But by then, it was too late. The distinctive click of a sniper rifle being chambered echoed through the high ceiling of the obsidian court, and suddenly, everything became very, very still. "I wouldn't," Nyasia said quietly, her voice carrying across the sudden silence. "My husband has been waiting for an excuse to test the new scope on his rifle. Apparently, it works quite well in low light." The lead cleaner's composure cracked for the first time as his eyes darted around the vast space of the obsidian court, searching for the source of the threat. His colleagues shifted uneasily, their hands hovering near their concealed weapons. The red targeting dot remained steady on the wall, a silent reminder of their vulnerability. "You're bluffing," the cleaner said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "This is a civilian shopping center. No one would risk—" "Risk what?" Nyasia interrupted, her voice taking on an edge that made several people step back. "A shooting in a crowded mall? You're right, that would be reckless." Her eyes locked onto his, and for the first time, she let him see what lurked behind her carefully maintained facade. "But then again, you're the ones who brought guns to a family shopping center." The cleaner's face hardened as recognition flickered in his eyes. "The shadow," he whispered, low enough that only she could hear. "The rumors were true. You didn't die that night." "No," Nyasia replied just as quietly, "but the woman you knew did. I suggest you leave before you meet her replacement." A bead of sweat rolled down the cleaner's temple as he processed the situation. His team was exposed, their cover was blown, and they were facing not only a sniper but also a legend from the underground world. One whose kills had been so precise, so untraceable, that some believed she had never really existed at all. Officer Thorne, oblivious to the layers of danger unfolding around him, chose that moment to reassert his authority. "Nobody's going anywhere," he declared, drawing his service weapon. "Everyone is interfering with a police investigation." The action sent ripples of panic through the remaining spectators. Dr. Thale grabbed Soren Casimir's arm, pulling him behind a marble column. Other shoppers scattered, seeking cover. But Nyasia remained perfectly still, her hand now resting openly on the hidden catch of her wheelchair, where her blade waited. "Officer," she said calmly, "I strongly suggest you lower your weapon before my husband mistakes you for a threat." As if to emphasize her point, a second red dot appeared on Thorne's chest. The officer's face went from red to white as he realized the gravity of his situation. His hand trembled, the gun wavering between Nyasia and the cleaners. The lead cleaner's earpiece crackled to life, and his expression shifted from uncertainty to controlled fear. Whatever he was hearing changed the equation dramatically. He raised his hand slowly, stepping back from Nyasia and Zephyr. "Stand down," he ordered his team, his voice tight. "We're compromised." "Compromised?" his colleague by the emergency exit hissed. "We can still contain this." "No," the leader cut him off. "We can't. Look at the security feeds." Nyasia allowed herself a small smile. Tarek hadn't come alone. He had brought his entire network of former intelligence operatives. By now, they would have control of the Galleria's security system, evidence of Black Iris Corporation's criminal activities, and enough leverage to bury everyone involved. The cleaners began to retreat, their movements careful and coordinated. But Officer Thorne, seeing his protection evaporating, made one final desperate move. He swung his gun toward Zephyr. "Nobody moves!" he shouted, hysteria creeping into his voice. "I'll shoot if—" He never finished the sentence. In one fluid motion, before anyone could blink, Nyasia's hidden blade found its mark. Thorne's gun clattered to the floor, his hand disabled by a precise strike to his median nerve. He collapsed, clutching his wrist, his face contorted in pain and shock. The movement had been too fast, too professional for a disabled woman in a wheelchair. The cleaners froze, their worst fears confirmed. The crowd gasped, phones still recording, as Nyasia smoothly returned the blade to its hiding place. "Mom?" Zephyr's voice was barely a whisper. "How did you—" "Later, sweetheart," she promised, her eyes still on the threats around them. "Right now, these men were just leaving. Weren't you?" The lead cleaner nodded slowly, his professional mask completely shattered. "Black Iris has no quarrel with you," he said carefully. "This incident never happened." "No," Nyasia agreed, her voice carrying a deadly promise. "It didn't, and it won't happen again. Because if anyone from your organization comes near my family—" She let the threat hang in the air, unfinished, but unmistakable. The cleaners backed away, dragging a whimpering Officer Thorne with them. The security guards had already disappeared, likely erasing any evidence of their involvement. The crowd of onlookers remained frozen, their phones capturing every moment of the surreal scene. As the last of the threats retreated, a new figure emerged from the shadows near the emergency exit. Nyasia Kalvyn moved with the same lethal grace as his wife, his sniper rifle now concealed in what appeared to be a musical instrument case. His eyes scanned the area professionally before settling on his family. "Sorry I'm late," he said with a grim smile. "Traffic was murder." The Obsidian Court had fallen eerily quiet, the only sounds the distant holiday music still playing cheerfully through the mall's speakers and the soft whispers of remaining onlookers. The marble floors reflected the warm glow of the crystal chandeliers, creating an almost dreamlike atmosphere that belied the violence that had just transpired. Tarek moved to his family with measured steps, his vigilant eyes still scanning for potential threats. He was dressed casually in a charcoal sweater and dark jeans, but Nyasia could see the tactical gear concealed beneath. Her husband had come prepared for war. "Are you both okay?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. Years of intelligence work had taught him to maintain composure, even in the most extreme situations. Zephyr launched himself into his father's arms, finally letting his brave facade crack. "Dad, Mom was amazing. She protected us," Nyasia finished firmly, giving her son a meaningful look. Some truths were better left unspoken, especially with so many phones still recording. "Just like you did." Dr. Thale stepped forward from behind the marble column, her phone now lowered but still gripped tightly. "I think," she said carefully, "we all need to have a conversation about what just happened here." Soren Casimir joined her, his usually cheerful face serious. "Those weren't real federal agents," he stated, "and that wasn't normal security protocol. Something much bigger is going on here." Nyasia exchanged a quick glance with Tarek, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. They had prepared for this possibility, the day when their carefully constructed normal life might intersect with their past. Now that it had happened, they needed to control the narrative. "You're right," Tarek acknowledged, still holding Zephyr protectively. "But this isn't the place for that conversation." He gestured to the gathering crowd of curious shoppers and mall employees who were cautiously returning to the scene. Cyrene Nash, the owner of the artisanal cafe where they had originally planned to meet, stepped forward. "My shop has a private back room," she offered, "and I think we could all use a strong cup of something warm right now." Nyasia noted how Cyrene's eyes lingered on the spot where her blade had disappeared into the wheelchair frame. Another observer who had seen too much, another loose end that needed to be addressed. But something in the cafe owner's stance, the way she moved, the calluses on her hands that spoke of more than coffee preparation, suggested she might have her own secrets to keep. "Thank you," Nyasia said, making a decision. "That would be perfect." As their small group made their way toward the cafe, Nyasia could hear the murmurs of speculation from the crowd. Phones were already uploading videos to social media, text messages flying between witnesses. The story would spread, but without context, without clear footage of what had really happened, it would just become another internet mystery. The private room at Cyrene's cafe was warm and intimate, with rich wooden panels and soft lighting that made the space feel isolated from the chaos they'd left behind. As Cyrene served them all spiced tea in delicate cups, Nyasia noticed how she moved with the same economical grace as the cleaners. No wasted motion, no unnecessary gestures. "So," Dr. Thale began, her hands wrapped around her teacup, "I think we all saw things tonight that don't quite add up. The question is, what do we do about it?" "Nothing," Tarek said firmly, "because nothing happened, right?" Soren shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Those men threatened a child. They were carrying weapons in a crowded mall. We can't just ignore that." "We're not ignoring it," Nyasia assured him, her voice gentle but firm. "We're handling it, but bringing attention to what happened here tonight would put more people in danger." "Black Iris Corporation," Cyrene said suddenly, setting down a plate of pastries with precise movements. "They've been using the high-end shops in this wing for money laundering. I'm guessing someone was getting close to exposing them." Nyasia's eyes narrowed as she studied the cafe owner. "You seem well informed." Cyrene's smile was sharp as a blade. "Let's just say your family isn't the only one with a complicated past. Some of us chose this location specifically to watch their operation." "Mom?" Zephyr's voice was small but steady. "Are these people like you and Dad? The ones you said were watching out for the good guys?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Nyasia felt the weight of everyone's attention, the careful balance they'd maintained for 10 years teetering on the edge of exposure. But looking at her son's face, seeing the trust and admiration there, she knew it was time for some version of the truth. "Something like that, sweetheart," she said carefully. "Sometimes people who've done difficult things in their past choose to use their skills to protect others instead, like guardian angels who operate in the shadows." "Is that why you can do the things you did out there?" he pressed. "Because you're a guardian angel?" Tarek set down his teacup with a soft clink. "We all have secrets, son. The important thing is how we use them. Your mother used hers to protect you tonight. That's all that matters." The soft lighting in Cyrene's private room cast gentle shadows on the wooden panels as a new tension settled over the gathered group. Outside, they could hear the muffled sounds of emergency vehicles arriving, no doubt responding to multiple calls about the incident in the Obsidian Court. Dr. Thale set down her phone, which had been buzzing constantly with notifications. "The videos are already going viral," she reported. "Most people think it was some kind of elaborate mall security drill gone wrong. A few are claiming police brutality. Nobody seems to know what really happened." "Good," Tarek said, his hand resting protectively on Zephyr's shoulder. "Let them speculate. The truth is too dangerous." "Is it?" Cyrene asked, locking the door to the private room with practiced efficiency. "Because from where I'm standing, the truth might be exactly what we need right now." She turned to face them, her barista's apron doing little to disguise her militant posture. "Black Iris Corporation has been operating with impunity for too long. They've corrupted local law enforcement, infiltrated legitimate businesses, and anyone who gets too close either disappears or has a convenient accident." Nyasia studied the cafe owner with renewed interest. "You lost someone to them, didn't you?" Cyrene's face hardened. "My sister. She was an investigative journalist working on a story about high-end retail fraud. 3 years ago, they made it look like a mugging gone wrong." She pulled up her sleeve, revealing a familiar tattoo, one that Nyasia recognized from her past life. "That's when I joined the network." "The network?" Zephyr asked, looking between the adults with curious eyes. "What's that?" Tarek and Nyasia exchanged glances. The network was something they'd both encountered in their previous lives, a loose alliance of former operatives, intelligence agents, and skilled professionals who had chosen to work outside the system to fight corruption and protect the innocent. It wasn't something they had planned to explain to their son, at least not yet. "It's a group of people who help others," Tarek explained carefully. "People who have special skills and use them to make sure bad things don't happen to good people." Soren cleared his throat. "Like what almost happened tonight?" His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his teacup. "Those men, they weren't just going to arrest anyone, were they?" "No," Nyasia confirmed, her voice soft but steel-edged. "They weren't. Black Iris Corporation doesn't leave witnesses when they're cleaning up loose ends." Dr. Thale leaned forward, her professional demeanor slipping to reveal something harder underneath. "Which is exactly why we need to act now. We have evidence. Dozens of witnesses, video footage, and I'm willing to bet that somewhere in this building there's a paper trail leading straight to their operation." "There is," Cyrene confirmed. "I've been collecting data for months. Account numbers, shipping manifests, security rotation schedules. Everything needed to expose their entire operation." She paused, looking directly at Nyasia. "But I never had the right allies to use it. Until now." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Nyasia felt the familiar pull of her old life, the thrill of the hunt, the satisfaction of bringing down corrupt powers, the pure clarity of purpose that came with being the shadow. But she also felt Zephyr's presence beside her, a reminder of everything she'd built in the past decade. "Mom?" Zephyr's voice cut through her thoughts. Remember what you told me about standing up to bullies? How sometimes you have to fight even when you're scared? Nyasia looked at her son, seeing in his eyes a wisdom beyond his years. I do, sweetheart. Well, he continued, his voice growing stronger. Isn't that what these bad people are? Really big bullies who hurt people like Cyrene's sister? Tarek shifted in his chair, his tactical training warring with parental instinct. It's not that simple, son. What we're talking about, it would be dangerous. Very dangerous. More dangerous than what just happened? Dr. Thale challenged. They already know who you are. Both of you. That puts you in danger whether you act or not. She was right, Nyasia realized. Their careful anonymity had been compromised. Black Iris Corporation would now see them as a threat, and unlike other potential witnesses, they knew exactly what the shadow was capable of. They would have to be eliminated. We have another problem, Soren added, checking his phone. Officer Thorne just made a statement to the media. He's claiming he was assaulted while investigating a terrorist threat at the mall. They're trying to control the narrative. Cyrene's laugh was bitter. Of course they are. And local media will run with it, because Black Iris owns half the newspapers in town. Then we own this moment, Nyasia said, her decision made. We use their aggression against them. They threw the first punch tonight, made it public, forced our hand. Now we show them exactly what happens when you threaten the wrong family. Tarek recognized the tone in his wife's voice. It was the shadow emerging. Not fully, but enough to remind him of why he'd fallen in love with her in the first place. Her strength, her sense of justice, her absolute commitment to protecting what mattered. If we do this, he said carefully, we do it right. Full operational security, no half measures. The network can provide support, Cyrene offered. Safe houses, communications, extraction if needed. We've been waiting for an opportunity like this. Dr. Thale nodded firmly. I can help too. The Rehabilitation Center has connections to several advocacy groups. Once we have the evidence, we can make sure it reaches the right people. And I have access to the mall's internal communications, Soren added. They don't pay much attention to the small business owners. Their mistake. Nyasia looked at each person in turn, seeing the determination in their eyes. Then she looked at Zephyr, her heart swelling with pride at his unwavering courage. What do you think, sweetheart? Should we show these bullies what happens when they pick on the wrong family? Zephyr sat up straighter, his chin lifted in a way that reminded her so much of Tarek. Yes, he said firmly. Let's be guardian angels. The next few hours transformed Cyrene's cafe into a command center. After sending Zephyr to the secure back office with a tablet full of games and a promise to stay put, the adults gathered around a table spread with blueprints of the mall and documents from Cyrene's investigation. Black Iris has 3 main operations in the Obsidian Court, Cyrene explained, pointing to different locations on the map. The luxury watch shop, the art gallery, and the rare coin dealership. All perfect fronts for money laundering. Tarek studied the layouts with a professional eye. Security blind spots? Here, here, and here, Cyrene indicated. They're careful, but they never expected anyone with our level of expertise to be watching. I've documented their patterns for months. Dr. Thale's phone buzzed again. The media's running with Thorne's story, she reported grimly. They're painting a picture of domestic terrorism thwarted by brave law enforcement. But the social media response is mixed. Too many witnesses posted videos showing a different story. We can use that, Nyasia said, her mind already crafting strategies. The more they push their false narrative, the more desperate they'll look when the truth comes out. She turned to Soren. What's happening in the mall right now? The shop owner checked his tablet, which was patched into the mall's security feeds thanks to some creative programming. They're doing damage control. Extra security patrols, cleaning crews, removing any trace of the confrontation. But look at this. He zoomed in on a feed showing men in suits entering the luxury watch shop. These aren't regular employees. Emergency cleanup team, Tarek confirmed, recognizing the type. They'll be removing or destroying evidence. Not all of it, Cyrene said with a grim smile. She moved to a painting on the wall and swung it aside, revealing a wall safe. I've been making copies of everything. Banking records, shipping manifests, even internal emails. Some of their people really should learn about encryption. Nyasia watched her husband's expression shift as he examined the documents Cyrene pulled out. She knew that look. He was seeing patterns, making connections, forming a plan. "We need to move fast," he said finally. "They'll be expecting us to lay low after tonight's confrontation. Instead, we hit them now, while they're focused on cleanup and damage control." "Hit them how?" Soren asked nervously. "They have armed men all over the mall." "We don't fight them directly," Nyasia explained, falling easily into her old role of strategy expert. "We fight them with information. Every corrupt organization has a weak point, the people who know too much but aren't loyal enough." Dr. Thale nodded in understanding. "During my time at the rehabilitation center, I've treated several employees from these shops. Some of them seemed troubled, like they wanted to talk but were afraid." "Find them," Tarek instructed. "But be careful. Black Iris probably has people watching you now." "They're watching all of us," Cyrene confirmed. "Standard protocol after an incident like this. They'll have teams monitoring our movements, our communications, our families." She trailed off as Nyasia suddenly stiffened, her hand moving instinctively to her wheelchair's hidden compartment. "Zephyr," she said, her voice tight with controlled fear. Tarek was already moving, pulling up the security feed for the back office on Soren's tablet. The room appeared empty, the tablet abandoned on the desk. "He's gone," Tarek announced, his voice deadly calm. "Someone took our son." The room erupted into action. Soren frantically checked other security cameras while Cyrene activated some kind of alert system on her phone. Dr. Thale moved to the window, scanning the street outside with experienced eyes. "There," she pointed. "Black SUV, government plates leaving the service entrance." Nyasia's face had gone completely still, her expression shifting into something that made everyone in the room take an involuntary step back. This wasn't the calm, controlled mother they'd seen earlier. This was the shadow emerging fully, cold and lethal as winter frost. "They're trying to control us," she said, her voice carrying an edge that could cut steel. "Using our son as leverage." "Standard operating procedure," Tarek agreed, his own expression hardening into something equally dangerous. "But they made a critical mistake." "What's that?" Soren asked, still frantically scanning security feeds. "They assumed we'd play by their rules," Nyasia answered. She reached into her wheelchair's frame and withdrew not just her blade, but a small device that looked like a phone. When she activated it, a holographic display sprang to life, showing a moving dot on a map of the city. "Is that—" Cyrene started. "A tracker," Tarek confirmed. "Sewn into the seam of his jacket, we've learned from experience to prepare for everything." "He's heading north on Marina Boulevard," Nyasia reported, studying the display. "Likely destination is the Black Iris corporate headquarters in the financial district." "You planned for something like this?" Dr. Thale asked, a mix of horror and admiration in her voice. "We planned for everything," Tarek said grimly. "Being parents doesn't mean we stopped being who we are. It just gave us more to protect." Nyasia's fingers flew over the holographic display, activating something that made several other dots appear on the map. "Network safe houses," she explained. "Cyrene, contact your people. We'll need equipment, transportation, and most importantly, eyes on that building." "Already done," Cyrene responded, her own phone buzzing with incoming messages. "Teams are mobilizing, but the corporate headquarters, that's their fortress. Heavy security, private military contractors, state-of-the-art surveillance." "Good," Nyasia said, and her smile made everyone in the room shiver. "That means they'll be expecting a frontal assault. They'll never see us coming from within." "Within?" Soren asked. "Black Iris isn't the only one with sleeper agents," Tarek explained, pulling out his own phone. "Some of us never really retired, we just went dormant." "This isn't just about exposing their operation anymore," Nyasia said, her voice carrying absolute certainty. This is about teaching them what happens when you target someone's family. By sunrise, Black Iris Corporation will be nothing but ashes, and everyone will know why. She looked around the room at their unlikely allies: a cafe owner with a vendetta, a doctor with a secret past, a shopkeeper with hidden skills. "Are you with us?" The answer was unanimous. Black Iris had started this fight by threatening the wrong family. Now they would learn why the Shadow's reputation had once made even the most hardened criminals tremble. The Black Iris corporate headquarters rose 60 stories into the night sky, its obsidian glass facade reflecting the city lights like a mirror. To the casual observer, it was just another financial district skyscraper. But Nyasia, watching from the back of a modified van 2 blocks away, saw it for what it really was: a fortress disguised as an office building. "Security report," Tarek demanded, his voice tight with controlled fury as he checked his tactical gear. Cyrene, now dressed in black tactical clothing that looked far more natural on her than her barista's apron, pulled up detailed schematics on a bank of monitors. 4 rings of security. Outer perimeter has armed patrols, motion sensors, and infrared cameras. Inner perimeter adds biometric scanning and electromagnetic locks. The elevator system is completely isolated from external networks, and the emergency stairs have kill switches every 3 floors. "Top floor?" Nyasia asked, though she already knew the answer. "Executive suite," Cyrene confirmed. "That's where they'll have Zephyr. The tracker shows he's somewhere in the upper levels." Dr. Thale, who had traded her professional attire for dark combat gear, pointed to a blinking light on one of the screens. "My network contact in their medical department confirms increased activity on the executive floor. They're setting up for something." "Interrogation," Tarek said grimly. "They'll want to know everything about us, our connections, the network. They'll use Zephyr as leverage." Nyasia's hands tightened on her wheelchair's armrests, the metal creaking under her grip. "They clearly don't know much about parent-child relationships," she said, her voice carrying a deadly calm. "You don't threaten someone's child and live to talk about it." Soren, monitoring communications chatter through a sophisticated setup that belied his shopkeeper appearance, suddenly held up a hand. "Movement at the entrance. Looks like Officer Thorne just arrived. And he's not alone." The security feed showed Thorne being escorted into the building by 2 men in expensive suits. His earlier bravado was gone, replaced by barely concealed fear. "They're tying up loose ends," Tarek observed. "Thorne's outlived his usefulness. They'll probably make him the scapegoat for everything that happened at the mall." "Good," Nyasia said coldly. "Let him see what it feels like to be trapped and helpless." She turned to address the gathered team. "Everyone clear on their roles?" Dr. Thale nodded, checking her medical kit, which contained far more than just first aid supplies. "I'm your inside access. My credentials still work in their system. I can get us through the first 2 security rings." "I've got surveillance and communications," Soren confirmed, his fingers dancing across multiple keyboards. "Once you're inside, I'll be your eyes and ears." The network's cyber team has already identified vulnerabilities in their security network. Cyrene chambered around in her suppressed weapon with practiced ease. "My team will create a distraction on the ground floor. When the alarms go off, their security protocols will force them to lock down the building, trapping everyone inside, including us." "Perfect," Tarek said, checking his own weapons. "That's exactly what we want. No one leaves until we have our son back." Nyasia wheeled herself to the van's equipment locker and pressed her palm against the biometric scanner. The locker hissed open, revealing a carefully organized array of specialized gear. With precise movements, she began attaching various devices to her wheelchair, transforming it from a medical device into something far more lethal. "Remember," she addressed the team, "these people are used to being untouchable. Their arrogance is their weakness. They'll expect a frontal assault because that's what desperate people do. They won't expect us to walk right through their front door." "Speaking of walking," Dr. Thale said carefully, "are you sure about this next part? The risk is necessary," Nyasia cut her off. From a hidden compartment in her wheelchair, she withdrew a small case containing 2 auto-injectors. "The nerve blocker will give me about 2 hours of mobility. After that. After that, you'll be in excruciating pain, Dr. Thale finished, and the damage could be permanent. My son is worth it, Nyasia said simply. Without hesitation, she injected both auto-injectors into her thigh. For a moment, her face contorted in pain as the drugs coursed through her system. Then, slowly, deliberately, she pushed herself to her feet. The room fell silent as Nyasia stood for the first time in 10 years. Her movements were stiff but purposeful as she took several experimental steps. Even standing still, there was something lethal about her posture, the coiled readiness of a predator preparing to strike. 2 hours, she said, checking her weapons with practiced efficiency. More than enough time. Tarek watched his wife with a mixture of pride and concern. He knew better than anyone the price she would pay for this temporary mobility, but he also knew there was no stopping her. Not when their son was in danger. Network teams are in position, Cyrene reported, checking her tactical pad. Ready to move on your command. Soren's fingers flew across his keyboards. Security systems are primed for our input. Once Dr. Thale's credentials hit their network, I can trigger a cascade failure that will give us control of their entire infrastructure. Then we're ready, Nyasia said, moving to stand beside her husband. For a moment, they looked at each other, volumes of understanding passing between them without words. They had both left their old lives behind for a chance at something normal, something pure. But now those old lives would serve a new purpose, protecting the family they had built. Remember, Tarek addressed the team one final time. Once we start this, there's no going back. Black Iris will throw everything they have at us. We'll be facing trained killers, corrupt law enforcement, and their own wetworks teams. Good, Nyasia said, and her smile was all shadow. Let them come. By sunrise, they'll understand exactly why I was called the Shadow, and why that name used to keep them awake at night. The lobby of Black Iris Tower was a study in calculated intimidation, soaring ceilings of black marble, walls of smoky glass, and security measures so seamlessly integrated into the architecture that most visitors never noticed they were being scanned, analyzed, and tracked from the moment they entered. Dr. Thale strode through the main entrance with professional confidence, her white lab coat and credentials drawing no more than cursory glances from the security staff. Behind her, Nyasia moved with the practiced grace of someone who belonged, her business attire and tablet marking her as just another late-night corporate worker. The wheelchair had been left behind, a calculated risk that would cost her dearly later. Dr. Thale, the security guard at the main desk, greeted her. Wasn't expecting you this evening. Emergency consultation, she replied smoothly, swiping her badge. My patient insisted on a follow-up after the incident at the mall. She gestured to Nyasia. Ms. Chen from legal is handling the paperwork. In their earpieces, Soren's voice whispered, Badge scan accepted. Initiating security protocol override. Now. Throughout the building, security cameras flickered for a fraction of a second, so briefly that most guards didn't notice. But in that instant, their entire surveillance system was compromised, feeding loops of empty corridors while Soren's programs tracked every guard's position in real time. Movement on the executive floor, Cyrene's voice came through the comm. They're setting up some kind of equipment in the main conference room. Thermal imaging shows about a dozen people, including one small heat signature. Nyasia's heart clenched at the mention of that small heat signature, but her face remained impassive as they passed through the first security checkpoint. Years of training kept her movements fluid despite the growing pain in her spine. The nerve blockers were effective, but not perfect. First phase initiated, Tarek's voice reported. He was already in position, having entered through the loading dock disguised as part of a cleaning crew. Ready for the blackout on your mark. They reached the elevators just as Officer Thorne emerged from one, flanked by his Black Iris escorts. His eyes widened in recognition and fear as he saw Nyasia. But before he could speak, Dr. Thale smoothly inserted herself between them. Officer, she said loudly, I'm glad I caught you. We need your signature on some incident reports from the mall. The distraction worked. The Black Iris escorts, more concerned with getting Thorne to his destination, barely glanced at Nyasia as they hurried past. But she caught the tremor in Thorne's hands, the sweat on his brow. He knew he was being led to his own execution. Thorne's outlived his usefulness, Nyasia subvocalized into her calm. They're taking him to the sub-basement. That's where they handle their personnel issues. Let them, Tarek replied coldly. He made his choice when he threatened our son. The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent, tension building with each passing floor. Dr. Thale kept her expression professionally neutral, but Nyasia could see the subtle signs of readiness in her posture. The doctor's medical bag contained far more than just standard emergency equipment. 60 seconds to blackout, Soren announced. Cyrene's team is in position for the ground floor distraction. Remember, Tarek added, once the power goes, we have exactly 3 minutes before their backup generators kick in. Make them count. The elevator dinged at the 58th floor, 2 below their target. Standard procedure for high-security floors was to force visitors to transfer elevators, creating another checkpoint. As they stepped out, Nyasia felt the first serious tremor of pain shoot through her spine. The nerve blockers were working overtime against her body's protests. "You okay?" Dr. Thale whispered as they approached the security desk. "I'm mobile," Nyasia replied through gritted teeth. "That's all that matters." The guard at the executive elevator barely looked up from his crossword puzzle as Dr. Thale presented her credentials. This high up, they weren't expecting trouble. The real security was electronic, not human. And thanks to Soren, those systems were now compromised. 10 seconds, Soren's voice counted down. 9, 8. Nyasia felt her muscles coil in anticipation. A decade of peaceful living fell away like autumn leaves, leaving behind the precise, lethal focus of the shadow. 3, 2, 1. The entire building plunged into darkness. Emergency lights flickered weakly, casting strange shadows across the black marble walls. And in that moment of confusion, Nyasia moved. The guard never saw what hit him. One moment he was reaching for his radio, the next he was unconscious, carefully lowered to the floor by Dr. Thale while Nyasia accessed the executive elevator's override controls. 2 minutes 40 seconds, Soren reported as they entered the elevator. Multiple security teams converging on the ground floor in response to Cyrene's distraction. "Status on Zephyr?" Nyasia demanded, checking her weapons as the elevator ascended. "Still in the conference room," Cyrene reported. "They've got some kind of medical equipment set up. Looks like... Christ, they're prepping for enhanced interrogation." The words sent a chill through everyone on the comm. They were planning to torture a child for information about his parents. "Change of plans," Nyasia said, her voice carrying a deadly calm that made even Dr. Thale step back. "No more stealth, no more careful extraction. When those doors open, we kill everyone in that room except my son." "Agreed." Tarek's voice was equally cold. "I'm 2 minutes out from your position. The cleaning crew won't be needing their uniforms anymore." The elevator slowed as it approached the 60th floor. Nyasia moved to one side of the doors, her weapons ready, every muscle coiled for violence. Dr. Thale took position on the other side, pulling surgical tools from her bag that had never been intended for healing. 1 minute to generator power, Soren warned. "After that, all security systems will be back online." 1 minute is all we need, Nyasia said softly, and for the first time that night, she let herself fully become what she had once been. The shadow wasn't just a name, it was a state of being, a perfect fusion of skill and lethal intent. The elevator doors opened onto darkness, and the shadow stepped out to reclaim her son. The executive floor of Black Iris Tower was designed to impress, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city skyline. But in the darkness, with only emergency lighting casting red shadows across black marble, it had become something else entirely. A battlefield. Nyasia moved like liquid shadow through the corridors, her movements precise despite the growing agony in her spine. The nerve blockers were fighting a losing battle against her body's protests, but she channeled the pain into focus. Behind her, Dr. Thale followed with equal stealth, her medical bag now open to reveal an arsenal that would never pass hospital inspection. "Conference room ahead," Soren whispered through the comm. 12 hostiles, heavily armed. They've got Zephyr in the center of the room, some kind of medical chair. "I see them," Nyasia sub-vocalized, peering through the glass walls of the conference room. Her son was strapped to a chair meant for interrogation, medical equipment arranged around him like torture instruments. But what made her blood truly freeze was his expression. Not fear, but defiance. He was his parents' child, refusing to break even in the face of monsters. 30 seconds to generator power, Tarek reported from somewhere in the building's maintenance tunnels. "Ready for simultaneous breach on your mark." Nyasia's hand tightened on her weapon as she watched one of the Black Iris operatives approach Zephyr with what looked like a syringe. "No time, we move now." She burst through the conference room doors like an avenging spirit, her first shots taking down the man with the syringe before he could react. Dr. Thale entered from the other side, her surgical tools finding lethal marks with professional precision. The room erupted into chaos. Black Iris operatives scrambled for weapons, but in the darkness, against an opponent they couldn't properly see, they were at a devastating disadvantage. The shadow hadn't earned her name by accident. She moved through the shadows like she was part of them, each shot and strike finding its mark with deadly accuracy. "Mom!" Zephyr's voice cut through the gunfire, strong despite his situation. "Close your eyes, sweetheart," Nyasia called out, her voice carrying a warmth that contrasted sharply with her lethal movements. "Keep them closed until I tell you." The backup generators roared to life just as Tarek burst through the ceiling tiles, his entry taking down 2 more operatives. The sudden light revealed the carnage. Half the Black Iris team already down, the others realizing too late exactly who they were facing. "The shadow," one of them gasped, recognition and fear mixing in his voice. "They said you were dead." "You threatened my son," Nyasia replied coldly, advancing despite the pain now shooting through her entire body. "You're about to wish I was." The remaining operatives opened fire, but she moved like smoke between their bullets, her own shots finding killing marks with mechanical precision. Dr. Thale provided covering fire while Tarek worked his way toward Zephyr, his movements equally lethal. Then, through the chaos, a new voice rang out. "Enough." The Black Iris Corporation's Director of Operations, Adelaide Kane, stepped into the room, holding a remote detonator. "One more move," she announced, "and I trigger the charges we've placed throughout this building. Everyone dies, including all those innocent office workers on the lower floors." Nyasia went still, calculating odds and angles. Kane was known in the underground world, a ruthless operator who had turned Black Iris from a simple money laundering operation into a criminal empire. "You won't," Tarek said confidently, not lowering his weapon. "Because Cyrene's team has already found and disabled your charges. Check your phone, if you still have any working communications." Kane's face tightened as she realized all her channels were dead. Soren's cyber assault had been complete. "It's over," Nyasia declared, taking another step forward despite her body's screaming protests. "Your operation is exposed. The network has already released your files to every major law enforcement agency and news outlet. Black Iris Corporation dies tonight." "You think it's that simple?" Kane laughed bitterly. "We own this city. We own the police, the judges, the media." "Not anymore, Doctor," Thale cut in. "Check the news. While we kept you busy up here, our teams have been moving throughout the city. Your bought officials are being arrested, your accounts frozen, your evidence secured." Kane's composure finally cracked. She raised a hidden weapon, but before she could fire, Nyasia moved. The Shadow's final strike was almost too fast to see, a fluid movement that ended with Kane on the floor, permanently neutralized. "Clear," Tarek announced, checking the room's perimeter while Dr. Thale rushed to free Zephyr. "You can open your eyes now, sweetheart," Nyasia said softly, fighting to stay standing as the nerve blockers began to fail. Zephyr looked around at the scene, then at his parents with a mix of awe and understanding. "You really are guardian angels," he said. "Just scarier ones." The comment startled a laugh from everyone in the room, breaking the tension. But the moment of relief was short-lived as Nyasia's legs finally gave out. Tarek caught her before she could fall, easing her gently to the floor. Medical team is on standby, doctor, Thala reported, already pulling real medical supplies from her bag. Let's get you both out of here. Hours later, as dawn broke over the city, the news was reporting the dramatic fall of Black Iris Corporation. Stories of corruption, money laundering, and attempted kidnapping filled the headlines. But nowhere was there any mention of the shadow or the family that had brought down an empire to protect their son. In a private room at Dr. Thal's rehabilitation center, Nyasia lay in a hospital bed, her body slowly recovering from the nerve blocker's effects. Zephyr was curled up asleep beside her, while Tarek kept watch by the window. Was it worth it? Tarek asked softly. Coming out of retirement? Nyasia looked down at their sleeping son, then back at her husband. For him? Always. But this was the last time. From now on, we protect him by being what we seem to be. Just a normal family. Normal, Tarek chuckled. With a mother who can take down a criminal empire from a wheelchair, a father who snipes bad guys from ventilation shafts, and a network of extremely lethal friends? Exactly, Nyasia smiled. Just your average, everyday family of guardian angels. Outside, the city was waking up to a new day, unaware of how close it had come to chaos, or of the shadow that had protected it through the night. And in that private room, a former Hitwoman held her son close, knowing that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't in the skill of the strike, but in the strength of a mother's love. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.